Fallon, for what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Will the clerk please distribute the amendment? Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the gentleman is recognized for the purposes of explaining his amendment.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Border security, this is essentially what this amendment does. It says that border security is a matter of national security. And with 1.3 million illegal crossings in the last fiscal year in the southwest land border of the United States, we're seeing this with increasing frequency. Now, most of the folks that are crossing the border, to be clear, are doing so because they want a better life. Unfortunately, some of the folks that are crossing the border are the very criminals that are preying on those people that are looking for a better life. And then we've got, of course, the Mexican drug cartels. There's about 9 major ones, like the CJNG, the Gulf cartels, the Juarez cartels, and these are some very, pretty much some of the most evil people that we have on the planet. They're making colossal amounts of money, in fact, quite frankly, into the billions. And the cartels make a lot of money on mass unlawful migration, and they do so in 2 ways. One, it's a lot easier for them to smuggle their drugs, their fentanyl, cocaine, and methamphetamine, when half of our Border Patrol agents are literally babysitting, changing diapers, administering COVID tests, et cetera. And then secondly, they're making money on the migrants themselves, taxing them. And also, there's an indentured servitude is alive and well in the United States in 2021. A lot of these folks recently have been coming across, and they're originating their journeys from Central America, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador. They don't have the money, some of them. And many of them, the cartels get to the border, and then the cartels tell them, well, then now you have to work for me. So we're witnessing one of the greatest and largest human smuggling and sexual trafficking operations in the world, in the history of the world. Mexico has 31 states. And by every definition, the country as a whole is fitting the definition of a narco state. The press is not free. There's massive police corruption. The drug cartels are a dominant force in more than one of the Mexican states, and we share a 1,950-mile border with this country. The GDP of the Mexican drug cartels, it's hard to say exactly, but almost all professional estimates are somewhere between 15 billion and 50 billion. That's the GDPs of some of our NATO allies, or at least in the ballpark, of allies like Bulgaria, Croatia, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. This is a significant issue, and all we're saying here, I mean, from the birth of the nation state, border security, and I don't care where you are on the planet and what time frame, whether it was the 1700s or today, border security is a national security issue. And in our home state of Texas, in just a recent 2-year period, according to the Texas DPS, the Department of Public Safety, there were 196,000 crimes committed by criminal aliens. So I think this is definitely something that hopefully we can all agree on and pass this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Ms. Jacobs is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I am opposed to this amendment, and I am opposed to the continued effort to militarize the border and dehumanize immigrants and asylum seekers. I represent a border community, and Mr. Fallon, I invite you and any of my colleagues to come visit. We have one of the lowest crime rates in the country, and San Diegans are proud to be a welcoming community, one that understands how important immigration is to our economy and the fabric of our society. And I want to reiterate that under both domestic and international law, people from Central America and around the world have a right to seek asylum and refuge in the United States, and we have a moral and legal obligation to help them. So if you care about law and order, well, law and order would compel us to follow the law and recognize that there is a right to asylum. It's incumbent upon us on this committee and all of us in Congress to stop treating immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees as a political football, whether they're coming from Central America or Afghanistan. Our communities are not yours to score political points. I yield back.
Dr. Desjardins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to speak in support of Mr. Fallon's amendment. It really is a shame that securing the border from our potential enemies has become a partisan issue. It should be intuitive that if your country has vulnerability on one of its borders, that enemies will seek to exploit that vulnerability. The question of whether we should strengthen our national borders is one with broad support among the American people. A Gallup poll from 2019 and you will remember that Mr. Border Control was in office at that time, showed that 74% of Americans view the situation at the U.S.-Mexican border as either a major problem or a crisis. Gallup found that this sentiment cut across party lines, and it's worth noting that the security situation at our southern border has only deteriorated since this poll was taken. What's more, our military leaders have testified before this committee that, in the words of NORTHCOM Commander General Van Herk, and I quote, "Border security is national security." He went on to say that if there is a porous opportunity at the border, then there will be nefarious actors that will seek to exploit it. I support Mr. Fallon's amendment. I don't think it's a controversial or partisan thing to say border security is national security. Ask the American people, ask our military leaders, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Escobar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to echo the comments made by my colleague from California, a fellow border representative, Sarah Jacobs. I represent El Paso, Texas, one of the largest border metroplexes in the world, the largest in our hemisphere. We, like other border communities, are among the safest communities in the country, with crime rates that have been low for decades, long before walls were constructed, long before the tough on crime mentality took hold and became highly popular. We have spent hundreds of billions of dollars on walls, on drones, on incarcerating vulnerable migrants, including children. That's been the approach of the United States, and it began with the Clinton administration. We have been failing at this for a very long time because of this approach. Instead of using alternatives to detention and other more humane and effective ways to address migration, we incarcerate people. Instead of addressing root causes, we build walls. Instead of opening up legal pathways in order to reduce undocumented pathways, we eliminate those legal pathways and try to crush asylum. That's not working. The high numbers that have been reported and that are listed in the amendment are largely a result, and this is according to Border Patrol's own statistics, largely a result of Title 42, the use of Title 42. What that means is that those high numbers don't represent single individuals. It represents the same individuals making the attempt multiple times to get in. People who are desperate, people who don't have legal pathways, will keep trying. So it would be my hope that all of us who want to seek true, compassionate, real ways to address growing migration which will only grow with the climate crisis, that we instead work together. What happens when we place the emphasis on border communities the way that this Congress and prior Congresses have done is it demonizes communities like mine. It inspires xenophobia, and it doesn't solve anything. Per DHS's own data, there are far more people with terrorist ties coming in through our airports than have ever come in through the southern border. But yet we treat our southern border differently. Gee, I wonder why. I yield back.
Is there any further debate on the amendment? Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I recognize that, first of all, I oppose the amendment. Look, I recognize that we have evolving situations all across the globe, but, you know, I will remind this committee that just 2 years ago, and I know things change, they change every day, when asked in a hearing before the U.S. Senate, the then commander of the Northern Command said that there is no military threat coming from the southern border with Mexico. I asked that same question not this year, I think in last year's posture hearing when we had Southcom and Northcom commanders there. I said, is it a military threat at our border? And both of them commented that our threat is China and Russia. That is our major threat. So we can talk all day long and all night long about what's happening at the border, but to characterize it a national security threat, it certainly is not high on the list for the Northcom and the Southcom commanders. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say some comments were made earlier suggesting that people who want border security are racist. You know, I was Latinos for Tennessee's Legislator of the Year as a state senator. Assuming that because we want border security, we're racist is racist. I just want to say that. And with that comment, I yield to Mr. Fallon.
Thank you, Dr. Green. I'll tell you a couple of things that this amendment doesn't do. It doesn't ask for any funding. It doesn't place the blame on the porous border with any individual or any political party. And it doesn't discourage anybody from migrating to this country legally. And it doesn't demonize one human being. To say that is hyperbolic. We have the Mexican drug cartels with a GDP estimated to be that of nation states within the NATO alliance, that equivalent. And Mexico is extremely volatile and incredibly violent because of these bad actors. And all we're doing is something very commonsensical in saying that we want to secure the border and it's a national security issue. I'm not accusing anybody on this committee or in this chamber of wanting more fentanyl in this country or more cocaine or more methamphetamine, but that's what a porous border gets us. And the very people, when you have an open border and a porous border is an immoral border for those that live north and south of it. Nobody seems to ever talk about the 15 to 30% of women that are sexually assaulted or raped along the journey when they migrate from southern Mexico or Central America. Are they forgotten? What about the migrants that are taken advantage of by who? The most evil people on the planet, the Mexican drug cartels. And I think that's why we see in our home state of Texas, along the border, a shift in political allegiances because they want that border secure too, because they're on the front lines of it. And they see that. All along, we have a 1,954-mile border with Mexico. And yes, Mexico and the southern border and the northern border haven't been treated equally lately. The Canadian border is closed. There's no Canadians coming here. I wonder why. I don't know. But we have 1.3 million people that have leaked through the southern border. I thought COVID was a serious issue. Apparently not. If you come through the southern border, but you can't come through the northern one, that's inconsistent. This is truly, and I believe in my heart of hearts, an amendment that shouldn't be political. We all want our country secure, and if you're not safe, then you're not free. And that's why I would really encourage my colleagues to support this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
Is there further debate on the amendment? Hearing none, the question occurs on the amendment. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed will say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.